Tudor was conceived in 1946 as, quote, a watch that our agents could sell at a more modest price than our Rolex watches, and yet one that could attain the standards of dependability for which Rolex is famous, said by Hans Wildorf. With those words, he started a debate that still occupies watch enthusiasts and collectors 77 years later. Is Tudor the poor man's Rolex? Well, today we will definitively answer this question. Let's get started. Welcome back to my channel, where I share my musings about watch collecting spiced with an economist's perspective. Now, one quick note before we dig into the data. I recently had a blast joining a fun panel on luxury watches. Dan Spitz, former guitarist for Anthrax and now master watchmaker, specializing in Patek Philippe, was there. And also Errol Adams, the founder and editor-in-chief of A Blog to Watch, was there to share insights from years of experience. I'll drop a link to the live stream below. Now, in this video, we're going to go over the data that definitively settles the question about the poor man's Rolex. Then I will explain why this is the right answer using economic theory. We will also discuss what brand actually is the alternative to Rolex, and then we'll discuss where Tudor goes from here. So let's get started by taking a look at the overall watch market. As I predicted, the downward trend is still there. With interest rates so high, the cost of credit is depressing the market. Collectors' appetites for sky-high prices have become exhausted. And the latest news shows that mortgage rates in the US are hitting close to 8%. Hang on to your hats, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Now, what about Rolex? Take a look at this chart. You can see that Rolex prices are moving in tandem with the overall market. In fact, you could even say the overall market is moving with Rolex. This is because Rolex in dollar terms is such a large part of the Swiss market. It's driving the market. And again, we see a downward trend. All that talk about Rolex being special and separate from other brands turned out not to be true. It's still headed down. So the question is, how do we use this data to test whether Tudor is a true alternative to Rolex? Economists will talk about the substitution effect. And it's defined as the change in demand for a good as a result of a change in the relative price of the good in terms of other goods. Okay, I know that was very confusing. No wonder I got a C- in that class. What it really means is that when the prices of Rolex goes up, then the demand for Tudor, and thus the price, should also go up if it's an alternative. Does that make sense? People got turned away by the Rolex AD and so they walked into the Tudor shop and they buy a watch. Simple. Recently, Watch Charts put out a video calling Tudor the worst performing among the top 10 Swiss brands. Ouch. As you can see from this list, the value retention is rather disappointing. Even now, with a downward trend, Rolex is doing a better job of holding value. And that really is the crux of the argument. When we consider the question of whether Tudor is a value alternative to Rolex, we would expect to see some degree of correlation in the movement of those prices. But this chart tells the truth. Tudor also experienced a rise in prices due to the pandemic lockdown. Yes, they also benefited from the mania of watch buying when people were stuck at home, but it's nothing like what we see for Rolex. Take a look at that spike. And that's the issue. The reason that Rolex prices had this massive spike is due to the sudden surge in demand and consequently the limited supply. People were clamoring for Rolex and couldn't buy one. And they all piled into the wait list. But think about it. Why should this be happening to this crazy degree if there was a true alternative? And that's the answer to the question. It's not me saying Tudor is not the alternative. It's the collective consensus of the market. No, in the aggregate, people are not saying that if I can't get a Rolex, then I'm happy with the Tudor. Now, I will reveal which brand is the real alternative, but there's your answer. The hysteria about Rolex should have helped raise the prices of Tudor. The fact that it didn't reveals the true sentiments of the market. In fact, their values moved in the opposite direction. As a brand, Tudor is losing 10% of value on the used market. I guess I understand it. Imagine telling your kid, son, I can get you a Rolex, but here's a Tudor as a consolation. Yeah, that does not appeal to me either. So is that it? It's all settled? No, because the real question you want answered is why? Why is this happening? Especially after Hans Wildorf said Tudor is the value option. You go to watch charts to see what's happening. You come to my channel to understand why. Hans Wildorf said that all you need for a great watch company is great marketing. And that's the problem with Tudor. It's the origin story. It started as a value option. It used standard ETA movements with, Rolex cases and bracelets. From the beginning, it was offered almost as a fake Rolex. And look at the counterfeit Rolexes now. They are actually high-quality watches, except for the movement. In 1953, Tudor launched a marketing campaign based on the robustness test of the Oyster Prince and its endurance in difficult situations. It showed a miner wearing a Tudor during 252 hours of excavation. It showed a stonecutter subjecting their watch to the vibrations of a drill for 30 hours. Over time, Tudor began narrowing the marketing focus on watches with a more technical design inspired by dangerous professions. The people selected for these campaigns were not celebrities, but everyday people chosen for their profession. That means rescue divers, mining engineers, and rally drivers. Rolex talked about the great achievements of humankind, the race to the summit of Everest, the swim across the English Channel, the first self-winding watch. They bragged about first achievements in horology. It didn't matter if it was actually true. Not really. What mattered was the perception that it was true. Tudor didn't brandish accomplishments. It talked about working-class values, about the endurance of tough tool watches for everyday normal people. Does anyone talk about Tudor being the first for anything? Maybe it's there, but no one talks about it. It's been said that heritage is marketing that's become mythology. I believe that. And mechanical watches now are all about heritage and social flexing. They are luxury items at every price point because we don't really need them. There was a time to extol the blue-collar values of a tool watch, but those days are long gone. And what does this mean for the public perception? Tudor is considered an inferior good. Now, don't get upset, Tudor fans. That's not a judgment. I'm using an economist term. An inferior good is a product where demand shows an inverse relationship with the consumer's income. In other words, the more money they make, the less they want that product. How many times has someone said, I'll get a Tudor until I get the call? Or they bought a Tudor to get street creds for a Rolex. That tells you how people really feel. It's sad but true. Now, what about the true alternative to Rolex? What brand really occupies that place? Let's look at the data again. If you look at this trend, you can see that Omega and Cartier has done relatively better than Tudor, or even Rolex. Now, most of this is due to not having run up their prices as much as Rolex, but they are still doing better than Tudor. Is it possible that some of the Rolex demand had carried over? Yes, though this data itself is not proof. So let's look at a longer perspective. This chart shows prices over the last 3 years. It shows that Omega did likely have some carryover from Rolex. In my own local mall, the Omega shop is right next to Rolex. And again, we see that Tudor did not benefit from their association with the father brand. The market simply does not consider Tudor as a true alternative. Overall, what the data shows is that in fact, there is no true alternative to Rolex. When people want a Rolex, they want a Rolex. A Rolex is a Rolex is a Rolex, and they are willing to wait. That's a painful truth for Tudor. So where do they go from here? Tudor's origin story means that they will likely never be accepted as equivalent to Rolex. So what is their proper place in the market? In 2009, Tudor relaunched with a major new advertising campaign. Designed for performance, engineered for elegance. The marketing placed a new emphasis on style in contrast to the 1980s ad based on strength and durability. In 2017, the Born to Dare campaign was launched, featuring David Beckham, Lady Gaga, and Jay Chou. Now, I don't know any watch collector who would buy a watch to Lady Gaga, but there's hope here. At least management is recognizing that their brand image needs a major rework. Love it or hate it, it does show that the brand is trying to carve out their own identity. And it can't be Rolex for a younger crowd. That's why it's so important that they have their own manufacturing and they've been making their own movements. The Kenichi facility is another major step into their own brand identity. The Meta certification is a sign of rebellion against Rolex. They're trying to one-up the father. They want to prove their horological value outside of the father brand. They have stated that Meta certification will come to more and more of their watches. And that is exactly what they need. Tudor has to do their own design and create a unique brand identity in the watch market. Now, I do feel hopeful for their future, but it remains to be seen if they will succeed. It'll be certainly fun to watch. I'll see you in the next video.